Welcome everybody to the second of 4 workshops on world language funded by the Associated Colleges of the South and organized by Washington and Lee, Furman, Southwestern, and the University of Richmond. We're delighted to have everyone participating from the various sites. And we're also delighted to welcome today our workshop presenter, Dr. Elizabeth Beth Kautz, who received a PhD in German, wave everyone, who received her PhD in German from the University of Minnesota and is currently employed at the University of Minnesota with a dual appointment in the Department of German, Scandinavian, and Dutch and the College of Liberal Arts Language Center. She is the coordinator for the 3rd semester German course, where she integrated modules on sustainability-related topics. She also oversees the development of hybrid language courses for the College of Liberal Arts. And welcome, Beth, and with that, we'll let you start.
Okay, great. Well, I thank you so much for coming at the end of a long day, close to the end of a long week. I'm here, but I'm delighted to be here today with you. Today I want to start out by giving a little bit of information about how much you already know and why you're here. We'll do a little bit of background on CBI, talk about why that might be important at the college level. I'm going to try to give my rationale for why sustainability, and then look at some of the types of lessons I've created, and talk about challenges in implementation. Okay. So the first thing that I'm interested in is what in your own teaching experience prompted you to come today. I'm thinking, is it something about CBI? Is it something about sustainability? Is it something that's changing in higher ed? Is it because, I don't know, why would you come to this topic? And maybe I'll let you first talk a little bit among yourselves and then have someone report back. I don't know how to do this. Do you want us to share what we've discussed?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, so we are at Furman University, and we are interested in how to integrate sustainability in the basic language classroom. And what we've noticed is in some of the textbooks that we have, it tends to be in the last chapter. And oftentimes, because of the way that the semester works out, we're not able to get to those materials. And then another thing, at our university, there's a big emphasis on sustainability at a university level. But the students seem to not be as interested in it, and we don't know if it's a generational thing. And you guys feel free to jump in if you want to add, or if they're overloaded or they don't have much energy for it. So that's one of the, while the university emphasizes it, sort of getting that to connect with the languages and the students. And then another thing is one of us is an AP exam grader, and they've changed it so that it's more integrated with language and culture. And so figuring out how to integrate these topics. And we have a program in Italy that's a slow foods program, and they talk a lot about sustainability in that class, but that's not a language class necessarily. So, did I report back everything? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're sure. Southwestern or Richmond?
Well, this is Richmond, and we have a couple people here who are actually going to teach on sustainability and are interested in how to do that from a clack point of view, because there will be clack sections in the language. And then we have other people who are more interested in the content-based aspect with sustainability as an example of content-based instruction. And the question that we really had is, how do you implement this at the upper levels where the students are unfamiliar with the material but also have difficulty at that advanced level of language? Mm-hmm. So like the 300 and 400 level. Okay. So that's a major issue for us, is trying to implement more of this kind of content-based instruction at the higher levels.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Hey, am I good? Can you hear me? Okay. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. I am the sole representative today, which might be a sign of a symptom, but I am currently teaching a kind of sustainability course. It's called Ecological Civilization International, and it's a new type of thing. We have a very small program in Chinese. There's just one FTE, and that's me. So we, above the second year level, so the 300 and 400 year level, or 300 400 level courses, there's just 2 half courses per semester, and one of them this semester is focused on gardening and environmental issues. But the core of the course that I've been using is just the standard, upper intermediate textbook. And then we go and work in the campus garden, we talk about it. I bring in small stories and examples from Chinese literature, but I don't really, and this is kind of experimental, very experimental for me, and the students are working it out the way with me too, and I'm very interested in seeing these materials and finding lesson plans and curricular goals that can tie into it. So I'm pretty excited about this webinar.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Someone here want to share?
Well, I am really new to this whole topic, and so I'm very interested in finding out more about teaching with blended learning, the flipped classroom. I teach German, so I may be already doing some of these things. I don't even know. I'm a little bit older, and I'm trying to stay in the game. And I think my colleague here is, she's been doing the flipped classroom already in Spanish, and is really interested in, I think, the sustainability and the content-based, both of my colleagues here.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That helps me kind of place everybody. So content-based instruction, as some of you know and some of you are less familiar, the basic idea is that you're dealing both with content and with language, and that, as the slide says, it's the concurrent teaching. For me, what is key is that it provides the context for meaningful communication. And so I think that there's a whole span of how this can happen, and there are different models. And some of these models come out of immersion teachings, particularly at the elementary level, where the subject matter is really important. And then we have also the CLAC kind of classes where, again, the subject matter, we want people that they're going to be tested on that as well. And then kind of at the other end, we have our sort of more traditional language classes, and where I think we often try to contextualize things, but the content kind of takes the back seat. So there's a variety of models out there. And just to kind of state that in some other words, this is an article from Camarada and Tiedick about content and language integration in the K-12 context. But they talk about this span between content-driven and language-driven. And in content-driven programs, subject matter content is taught through the L2. Content is the priority, and language learning is secondary, if not incidental. Content objectives are determined by the subject matter curriculum and are derived from content standards when they're going to be tested. And teachers teachers start with the content, and then they kind of figure out out of that, what language can I pick out to focus on. And the students and teachers are held accountable for the content, usually in some kind of standardized testing. On the other end, the language-driven, the language learning is the priority. The content is more incidental. The language objectives are determined by the curriculum, which is often a grammar-based curriculum. Students are evaluated on their language proficiency, and neither teachers nor students are held accountable for the content. And that's, for me, really the type of training that I had and for many, many years taught. That really we were focused on the 4 skills of reading, writing, speaking, and listening. We put it in a context, but at the end, and I would hear my colleagues say sometimes, well, I don't really care what you talk about. I just want to see that you know how to use the past tense. Mm-hmm. And so in the end, even though we were talking about culture, there was nothing that showed them that was really what was important. Mm-hmm. And it was very acceptable to keep things at a very superficial level. Mm-hmm. And so what I find with CBI is that I think it kind of ups the ante. And it's a way to increase the intellectual rigor, and which is often more appropriate in a university setting. In thinking about this range of content and language, I'd like you to kind of think a little bit about your own courses and where do you fall on that spectrum? And what is it that you're addressing during your class lessons, and what is it that you're assessing? To what degree do students need to give intellectual answers that show critical thinking, comparing, analyzing, or how much is it really focused on being able to get that sentence out? This could also be, of course, different at different levels, but I'd like you to kind of think about how do you deal with these questions. I'm going to let you talk a little bit again. Sorry about that. I forgot to be watching the chat, and we were busy talking here. Yeah, I'll just kind of start and sort of summarize what here we had a good discussion thinking about the role that textbooks play in this, particularly at the lower level, and that it's hard to deviate from the patterns that are set forth there. We talked about students using critical thinking skills in their analysis of the language and thinking about narratives. And then sometimes thinking about little cultural nuggets that might come into it, but kind of the difficulty of making a larger shift to thinking about to reporting and thinking about the culture. I think having culture be the content it can be the context, and a lot of the teaching and critical thinking can go on there, but in the end it's still secondary, and the learning that comes out of it we don't really gauge. I'm wondering if any other groups had different conclusions.
So this is Richmond, and I'm going to let one of our participants summarize our discussion, which was about, are we assessing language or are we assessing content, mostly?
So I'm going to propose that that's a false dichotomy, and actually we don't really even need to beat ourselves up about where we are on the continuum or whether we're assessing content, and I wouldn't even call it secondary. I think at the end of the day, we're assessing language. But I think in so many cases, honestly, the content we're trying to smuggle into this language course, whether it's sustainability or, what was the other one we were talking about, water use. Oh, he had, of course, something about nuclear energy. We're not experts, we're not trained ecologists on any of that stuff, but very often for our students, the first time they ever learn about this topic happens to be in their language class. So the example you have for French, students who are going about their business on campus not paying any attention to their water use are suddenly going to have to pay attention to their water use because it's their assignment for French class. Or hear your thing on Lebensraum about, how the kind of microecology of the city. I may have not known anything about that before, but now having read in German, okay, I kind of know something about it. Am I going to assess my students on their precise understanding of city ecology, urban ecology? Not really, but that's besides the point, because everything they know about it, they now know in German, because they don't even know anything about that in English anyway. So it turns out, the good news is, I think these things go perfectly together. If they can manage to talk about these things fairly well in the language that we're trying to teach. In other words, the assessment is their language skills are good. Then almost by definition, their understanding of that topic has become better than what it was before.
I would agree, and I think what I want to point out is that we're giving them something meaningful to talk about. And so I think that's already a jump from a lot of kind of standard role plays, perhaps, that stay at a more functional level. Another group?
If in French class or in German class, they're learning these micro lessons, concepts about city ecology, I agree with you. I think that's somewhat more ultimately enriching to the whole person than standing around in that same class and role-playing, hello, what are you doing this afternoon? Shall we go to the movies? I mean, that just reinforces what they're always doing anyway.
We're ready to report from Furman.
Hi, I'm Bill Allen. I teach French at Furman. I'm surrounded by Spanish colleagues today, but we find a lot of similarity. Most of us teach from the 100 level to the 400 level, and so we agree that, of course, in the 100 to 200 level, things tend to be more language driven. Whereas when we get up into literature or civilization courses, of course, we're much more focused on the content. All of us, even at the upper levels, consider that there must be some ongoing form of language teaching and holding students accountable for good grammar and vocabulary use. But we also agree that sort of at the advanced to 200 level, as we move from composition courses to civilization courses, we see a big gap between what our students are accustomed to doing and then that first content-based course in literature or civilization. They often have a lot of trouble with it. So I'm used that perhaps doing more content-based instruction in the traditional grammar or language class might be a good way to prepare students for those upper level courses where they're required to deal with ideas and use critical thinking skills.
Can other people mute their mics because we can't hear very well? There's a weird. Yeah, that's better.
Okay. Are we ready for Southwestern?
Yep.
Okay. So what I'm dealing with, with our first and second year courses, the way that I have been teaching them for some time is that they really have been primarily language driven, and we're going by the textbook and the students' management of the material in the textbook, working through that, and since I'm the one doing a lot of this, I've been doing it over and over again. I've got a very valuable colleague who helps me part-time, and she's really made a lot of innovative changes. But I have gotten really tired of teaching beginning Chinese over and over and over again. And so I'm working to try to build in more content, more relevance. One of the ways that we have is to have them role play really basic and essential, and I mean small letter C culture, which is not necessarily less important than large capital C culture, but have them enact certain kinds of etiquette and actions, and so it's built into their role play assignment. How to speak respectfully to elderly people, how to speak properly to friends and children, for example, and then at the upper level courses, they are pretty much wide open in a certain way. We've got more than one level in each class. I used to separate the intermediate and the advanced students, but because of scheduling, they've been brought in together, and they have decided as a body that they don't mind working together. So it winds up being quite individual. I give them an essay assignment, and my curricular objectives so far is to get them to extend out and make longer lines of reasoning, so we're working for that function approach. And then I write back to them notes and comments and reflection on what they've written to me. And so in that sense, it starts becoming more content driven, but we're still, like for example, today I have a course where we do business Chinese, and this text is far above their abilities right now, so I have to walk them through it very carefully. But I did say to them, read, and I just said this in English, over the weekend, read about Alibaba and look at the corporate strategies they're making. We're going to report back. You're going to report back on Tuesday when we meet again. So that's one way of dealing with it. But, it's really a problem to have so many things bouncing around. And another thing that I'm doing is, instead of talking about content-based issues in English in the language classroom, I have it moved out of the classroom, and we have what we call Chinese paideia moments, interdisciplinary times. So last week we talked about the historical development of Chinese as a spoken language. Next week we'll talk about the writing language and see if we can relate that to codes and signs and alphabets and other writing systems. So, but I don't really have a way to assess it other than just that individual connection and contact.
Yeah, I'm not going to go in too much into assessment because I know you have another workshop coming up in a few weeks about integrated performance assessment, and I'll just put a plug in for that, saying that that's a way to assess the content as well, because they have to write about it, they need to speak about it, and it's in a particular, yes, it has a particular content focus. So pay attention to that. And I've tried to start doing some integrated performance assessment in my own class this year. So that's kind of the route that I'm trying to go. So you have at your table some of the lesson plans, and I would, from Cobalt, which it was part of the Carla, one of the Carla Summer Institutes, and lessons that are taught by Dee Tiedick, and what I don't want to go into too much detail because I think we need to move on, but one of the things that I have learned from some of these people is looking at these objectives, where they are outlining what are the content objectives, what are the cultural objectives, what are the language objectives. And I think one thing to think about at the advanced level is looking at these language obligatory and language compatible. And so these goals are often coming out of what you can do with that authentic text that you're working with. And so rather than relying on the grammar topic of the week in the textbook, they're looking at what does this text, how does this text, what does this text present, lend itself to learning grammar-wise, or if I have a certain activity that I want students to do with it, what's the language they're going to need to be able to talk about it. And so by thinking about what's the activity or what's the text, that can drive what language you need to cover for them to be able to do it. And so you might not end up following the traditional grammar pattern, but it gives you a chance to introduce a topic, a grammar topic that they're going to need, and having that need there gives a more important, gives a meaningful context of why I would need to use this grammar structure. Similarly, I'm losing my train of thought. And it also can be a source of review of a topic that might have been addressed earlier, but now in this particular type of task, they're going to need to use that grammar structure. So I commend this type of lesson plan for you to look at, not necessarily to follow, but I think it helps me think about giving focus to what could my content objectives be, and getting to this idea of when they walk out the door, what do I want them to remember beyond knowing that it's haben versus sein, for the perfect tense. What else do I want them to take out? So this all looks like a lot of hard work, so why do we want to do it? Why do we want to change what we're doing? What makes it worthwhile? And so I just want to kind of think about how does this align with what we're doing at the college level. And so it's been, a few years ago, it was brought to my attention that 1/6 of the students' time at our college is in the language class, is in the foreign language classroom, because we have a 4-semester language requirement, 5 days a week, And boy, so I have to kind of be able to think about, well, why should they do that? And it's not in high school, it's in college. They're paying big bucks for this, so what are they getting? And so I feel that I feel a need to give students more than language. And so thinking down the line of, what is it that they're going to remember? I've studied a lot of languages, but I don't remember a whole lot, unfortunately. And so I sometimes think, what is it that my students are going to take away from it? And that's where I think the content comes in. You probably have student learning outcomes at your institution. And so thinking about how is what I'm doing in my class contribute to these student learning outcomes. Beyond, and communication is always one of them, can communicate effectively, but how am I really getting at these other learning objectives? Similarly, the focus on 21st century skills. What is it that is happening in my class that is leading them to develop these skills that they are going to need once they are out of the classroom? And now you can't read that at all. And I'm kind of a late convert to the standards. And I don't know what it's like on your campus or in your experience, but the standards for foreign language education that came out in 1996 from ACTFL is not something that really anybody on my campus talked about. We certainly didn't incorporate them. It really was something that I really only came to learn about through CARLA, the Center for Advanced Research on Language Acquisition. And it was, in my mind, something that was associated with K-12. And it's only been in recent years where I've started to realize how useful these can be at the college level. And I've really grabbed onto them because I think that they provide a great framework for getting at the content. And so whatever content I'm looking at, I want to then think about it in a comparative way, or I want to connect it to another discipline. And so looking for how to, and then with the cultures, the whole idea of thinking about the products and the practices and how those are connected to perspectives opens up for me a way of getting at important or meaningful content beyond the kind of standard drills. And certainly CLAC is another way of doing that. So a little bit, I know some about why sustainability then. And one, just off top, I think it's an important issue. But I think it's one of the things that's interesting about sustainability is that it in itself is interdisciplinary and requires students to think in a more critical way. Find my nice little quote here that I wanted to say with this slide. Here's my quote. By its very nature, sustainability studies requires higher order thinking, considering different points of view, understanding complex relationships at multiple levels, and analyzing systems dynamics. Sustainable development requires that we see the world as a system that connects space, a system that connects time. What happens in one place can affect what happens in another. And so that's one, I think, often sustainability is just equated with the environment. And so I just want to point out that it's really these three pillars. And so we're looking at the economy, society, and cultural aspects as well as the environmental. And that makes it much more complex. And so there's more avenues of how to come into a topic area. And this idea of making connections is, CLAC, okay. Backing up to what is CLAC. CLAC is Cultures and Languages Across the Curriculum, or Languages Across the Curriculum. And it is a model where students would, sometimes it's a trailer course where there might be a large lecture class and then there's a section that talks more about that but in the target language. Or it might be the idea of trying to get a history professor to maybe offer the class in Spanish, but then having people from the language department support that. So it's a way of connecting departments outside the language department with the language department to address both content and language. And there's a consortium of colleges that are working on that. Okay. So what I want to point out with this connections, one of the national standards, which are now called World Readiness Standards, is about making connections. And quoted there, learners build, reinforce, and expand their knowledge of other disciplines while using the language to develop critical thinking and to solve problems creatively. And so that's where I think that's a nice bridge to CLAC, but then also, again, thinking about how can what's happening in my classroom relate to what's happening in their biology class or relate to what's happening in their economics class. In German, I think there's a lot of really nice connections because in the culture itself, sustainability is a big topic. But, and here I'm going to get to the first year people. For me, it's this third point that it adds relevance and deeper meaning to a lot of the typical discussions about daily routines, work, travel, food, city life. And then also I think for German, it encourages students to think of in a more contemporary view of Germany and also in a more positive view of Germany because it's an area where Germany is a leader, and so rather than getting stuck in the past, it's a way of moving a focus towards the future. So I want to share with you some of the ways that we have done this or that I've tried to do it. And I don't know if you had a chance to look at this, but this is something, it's called the Green German Project, and we had funding through Carla a couple years ago. And really the way this came about was we had an undergraduate student who was a sustainability studies minor and a German major. And we got together with him and he helped identify 15 topic areas and these modules that were important from the perspective of sustainability. And we worked then to come up with sample lesson plans with using authentic materials, so using videos from online or websites or an article. And the way these are set up is that they could be used individually or they could be grouped together to be an upper level course, and that's one of the ways my colleague is using them, Charlotte Moline. She's picking and choosing from these, putting them together, and then she offered a course on food, politics, and energy, and brought in these to supplement. So what we're trying to do here is thinking about how these might come into an existing topic or course that you're already teaching, and then how can this help with that. And this is an example of, you can't see it here either, but it kind of goes through a series of worksheets, but listening comprehension, reading comprehension, students doing pair work, then going to some type of presentation, perhaps there's a debate, is a small group, they get together and come up with a product that they are then going to sell to the rest of the class. So in these, we've worked hard to try to address the 3 modes of communication: interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational. But the focus also is on using authentic materials. So this would be a starting point, I would say. The overviews and everything is in English. The actual student worksheets are in the target language, but it's something that could provide some examples of how you might go about beginning to bring this into your classroom. I also then want to talk a little bit about what I'm doing currently. So after we created these 15 modules and we kind of put them out there, and who wants to try it out, I started trying to think, how could I do it in my own class? And so the way I've thought about it is, this is my third semester class, and we have traditionally 4 topic areas: free time and hobbies, travel, your studies and careers, and your living situation. And I tried to think about how, and it's kind of what you're referring to, someone said slipping in, but it's kind of how could I slip in some kind of sustainability mini unit into each of these chapters. And so so I have in my travel unit then something about sustainable travel. In the chapter on careers and studies, we look at green jobs, or how green topics are incorporated into job training in Germany. And then thinking about the living situations, we looked at the role of urban gardens. And I want to go into a little bit more detail about kind of how we worked with this. And I'm going to be going out to a website, so I hope I don't lose. Let's see, I am going to go to my screen, and I'm going here. And I did it! Yay! So this is my course website, and I actually want to go back to chapter 1. And so I had them working with this PDF file, this Nature in the City, and I guess I'm going to have to go back to that. We're just going to skip that for now. But it was what it is it's a PDF of that talks about where you can find green spaces in the city and why you might want to have green spaces in the city, and what do people do in green spaces in the city. And so I had students first look at that to kind of sensitize them to the idea of what are the roles of having parks, and how do they contribute to quality of life in the city where you might live. In a rural setting, it's going to be kind of a different approach, but this was thinking about urban cities. And so first we talked about that, and then we moved to a video. And this was then this video about rooftop gardens. And their task was to think about what would be the advantages for the gardener or the family, what might be the advantages for the city and the environment. And they gathered that, and then eventually they worked in writing something in a forum. But I want to show you a little bit. I need to go back now to, to share document. So this was this PDF, which had a lot of great visuals, and one of the nice things language-wise is that it kept coming back to the word Raum or space. And going through it, it started out with a space to relax, to recover, space to experience something, space to experience something, space to enjoy something. And then different types of places where life are in the city. A place where you can relax, there can be quiet. A place where you can kind of pull back. And then also a place where there can be, where you can take action. And then the video, let's see. So I'm just going to play this video, and I kind of want you to think about what do you think your students could get out of this video visually? What could they get out of it speaking-wise? And what does it say about current German culture?
Die Natur vor der Haustür. Die suchen immer mehr Großstädter. Und zwar gerne direkt in der Innenstadt, wie hier, auf dem Dach. Der Garten von Christian Gottschlich im Berliner Stadtteil Prenzlauer Berg.
Das ist ja der Traum eines jeden, dass man abends im Garten sitzt, ein bisschen grillt, die Wärme alles genießt, ein bisschen Gärtnern, ein bisschen, ist ja keine große Arbeit, weil es ein kleiner Garten ist, einfach mal für die Erholung.
Der Dachgarten der Familie Gottschlich ist 200 Quadratmeter groß. Insgesamt 80 Tonnen Erde wurden aufgeschüttet. Damit ist der Erdboden 25 Zentimeter tief. Nur so können Obstbäume wie dieser Kirschbaum hier Wurzeln schlagen. Die 9-jährige Tochter hilft gerne bei der Gartenarbeit, denn die Familie macht hier alles selbst. Christian Gottschlich liebt Nutzpflanzen wie Tomaten oder Beerensträucher, um sie später im Jahr abernten zu können.
Und einfach für die Kinder, dass die erleben, wie wenn wir jetzt Himbeeren, Heidelbeeren, Brombeeren, Kirschen, wie das alles wächst und dass man sowas auch nicht nur aus dem Gemüseladen bekommt, sondern dass es auch wirklich an den Bäumen wächst und dass die Kinder sich das wegnehmen können.
Auch in der Königlichen Gartenakademie in Berlin-Dahlem ist der Trend, mitten in der Großstadt selbst zu Gärtnern bekannt. Hier können Zier- und Nutzpflanzen speziell für Dachgärten und Balkone gekauft werden. Und es gibt zahlreiche Kurse für Städter, die gärtnern wollen. Die belgische Gartenplanerin Isabel van Groningen bietet seit mehreren Jahren Workshops an. Die Nachfrage ist hoch.
In Großstädten gibt es heutzutage eine ganz neue Generation von Leuten, die große Bedürfnis haben, wieder zu entdecken, diese Verbindung zur Natur. Wir sind über Jahre, haben uns völlig entfernt von der Natur und jetzt möchten wir halt wieder zurückgehen und entdecken, woher es kommt. Und diese Freude an rauszugehen, Pflanzen zu beobachten beim Wachsen, Blühen, die kommen, die gehen, aber auch was zu ernten zu können, ist halt ganz wichtig geworden für die Leute.
Besonders häufig zeigt Isabel van Groningen, wie Kräuter und Salatpflanzen gezogen werden. Klassiker sind dabei Rosmarin und Salate, die bei ausreichender Sonne pflegeleicht sind. Sogar Gemüse wird immer häufiger angebaut, besonders gerne auf den Dachterrassen der Stadt.
Man versucht immer, was zu haben, was es nicht gibt. Also diese ganz ungewöhnliche Tomatensorte zum Beispiel, ungewöhnliche gelbe Zucchinis, also gewisse Sachen, die man nicht unbedingt im Laden findet. Das ist dann so das Lifestyle-Element, das Hippe, was man dann so zum Tisch bringen kann, wenn man Gäste hat.
Ganz anders ist diese Dachgartenanlage im Süden von Berlin. Nüchtern gestaltet und eher exklusiv. Jede der 19 Parteien hat hier in knapp 20 Metern Höhe einen eigenen kleinen Garten. Buchsbäume schützen vor neugierigen Blicken. Wer die Nachbarn kurz treffen möchte, erreicht sie über eine Galerie, die außen herum führt. Oder man genießt einfach das Grün über den Dächern der Großstadt.
I think Southwestern wants to get back in. Say that again? I think Southwestern is trying to log back in. Yeah, we gave it to them. Right.
Oh, there they come.
There they are.
Hi.
Okay. So students then wrote in a forum about their own experiences with having a garden. So I was trying to get them to reflect a little bit on their own experiences with gardens. What did they have when they were growing up? What did they do in their garden? How far away was it? Well, yeah, what did they do in their garden? Do they have a garden now? How do they experience nature today? What would they like to do in a garden in the future? And so it was interesting to have them, for them to reflect on that and start incorporating some of the vocabulary that they had heard in the video. That unit then ended with a photo forum where they talked about how do they experience nature now in the city where they live. And they uploaded an image, and there we have the beautiful Mississippi River, and wrote about why it's important to them, what they can do there. And then other students commented on so we have a lot of lakes in the city in Minneapolis, and so a lot of students ended up, interestingly, writing about the water, either about the lakes in the city or the river, and how they spend their free time there. In the current chapter that we're in, the topic is travel, and so the students are working on sustainable travel. And again, they're working with some videos, but just to kind of talk through a little bit, I can go back. Sorry about that. In the sustainable travel, one of the important things there is they're in one of the videos they're hearing about what are some tips how to travel sustainably, kind of what constitutes sustainable travel, and then they're applying that in an in-class activity. And one way is that a very common activity, I think, in travel units is to look at a list of hotel options or travel packages and talk about the pros and cons of these. And one of the ways that we're doing that a little bit differently is that the examples are about, they're applying the criteria of is this sustainable or not. And they're doing that they're pretending that they are a rating agency and then giving the trip either 5 stars or 4 stars or 3 stars. So I think that's where I'm trying to make this link back to applying and using the critical thinking, so that they've learned about what makes a trip sustainable or not, and then applying that. So yeah, that's the way I'm trying to do that. I'm thinking about creating your own materials. One way is that I look for a way to, how could I bring something into a class or a chapter that I'm already teaching. And so thinking about this with the cycle of food production, where might that fit into a chapter that you already teach? And so thinking small rather than trying to come up with a whole huge new curriculum, how might you bring in something more content-based into something you're already doing? So I just to give you a little time to talk again about how might, if you look at this, how might this be, could you bring something into one of your own courses that you're teaching now? And I'll flip back to this and let you talk about that. Hello? If we could maybe just get a brief report from each group, if there's something that stands out that you think would be an obvious into a course that you're already teaching. Yeah.
Well, Furman University again. I'm teaching a course on Romantic literature, and that has some obvious connections with the natural world, poets extolling nature. The other end of the Romantic spectrum is the supernatural, so that might give me an axis to work with.
Did we have any other ideas? I think that's it for us from Furman. We didn't have very much time to discuss, so that was all that. Okay. All right.
Well, just, excuse me. Sorry about that. I just noticed that in my third semester course we talk about travel, we talk about careers, and this would be an ideal place to bring this kind of topic in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I want to move
And we were
on.
talking, I was just going to say, Richmond, we were talking about the food sustainability thing and how we all teach about food, but we don't really talk about this larger aspect and how easy it would be, particularly for listening and reading comprehension at the lower levels, to bring in this more intellectually challenging material.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we're going to jump on that and look at some ideas about how you might do that. So if you're thinking about food, do you teach in grocery shopping, restaurants, family meals, cooking and meal preparation, healthy eating? Very common topics in a first and second year. So when I start thinking about how I'm going to do this... Do you want to say something? You have a question?
I would like to say something.
Oh, sorry.
No, sorry to interrupt, but based on our discussions in Italy, and these, as I said, are always in English, it occurs to me that when we study food in the lower level language classroom, we're always talking about whole foods and not processed foods. Think about it.
Oh, I like it. I like it. That's a good... That's a great thing to bring up. Yep. Why is that? Yeah. So I start with the standards and think about how can I connect food to another discipline? How can I compare what is the way food is dealt with here as opposed to, or in contrast to, target culture? What might communities, what kind of communities might form around food? And then the practices and perspectives. And I try to use authentic materials to get at that. We were talking about, in our group, a little bit of the difficulty with vocabulary. And that is that's, I think, one of the tough starting points, both in using authentic materials and in doing content-based instruction. And so what I have started looking for materials that are educational and that are often aimed at kids or a young audience. And in Germany, at least, there is a lot of educational material out there. This is an example of something that comes from the EU, and they have these in all different languages. This is just the example of the English. And so it's a way to, in a very, well, the images, but then a controlled amount of text is a great way to start working for identifying key vocabulary. Another example is they have these postcards, and you can't read it here. But again, this is a very short text where you could pick out the key vocabulary and start thinking about how, what I try to get at is expanding their vocabulary because they have a new context to use it in. And so moving beyond the way they talked about it perhaps in the first year. In the second year, they can talk about it in a different way. So again, thinking about ways you might get into this, just thinking about products and practices related to food. You know, what are the choices, and thinking about where you live, what kind of stores do you have in your community, how did the food get to the store, where do you shop for your food, how often do you shop for your food, how much do you pay for your food, and these are just products and practices related to food, but then if you bring in the sustainability component, it adds another level of, are you going to buy the organic food, how much is it going to cost, where did it come from, who grew it, what were the working conditions. So it again, like I said, it can up the complexity a bit. Again, using authentic materials, these are just things that I found on the website. Thinking about, it was interesting to me just to see, you know, how many stores in Germany are marketing organic food. Even the super cheap chains all now have their own organic line. Or looking at the website, and here again, looking at vocabulary. every German company has a page about sustainability where they give their company profile and what they're doing. Another way of getting at some of that vocabulary. This is again the organic line of a particular place. Another thing is why do people buy organic? This is a blog. I don't really exactly remember how I got here, but I was doing Google searches. I think I put in Warum kauft ihr Bio? You know, why do you buy organic? And then pressed the blog search on Google and came up with this. So again, a great way of getting authentic language and from perspectives that you wouldn't normally get. And sometimes it's nice also to have that, what are the people in the target culture saying, and not always about us. So I think that sometimes, in particular with a topic like this, it can get, sometimes people don't want to, they think it's too political, and they don't want to speak their own mind. So sometimes having an outside point of view to analyze is helpful. Similarly with restaurants, do the restaurants in your community serve organic food? Go online, find out what are the restaurants serving in the target country. Look, you can find all those menus online. So again, these are a lot of times very typical activities that you would do, but adding the sustainability component brings in issues of the economy, brings in issues of justice, brings in issues of health and the environment, which simply enriches what you can talk about. A little bit, again, on how I go about it is I look for these types of educational sites, trying to find a variety of authentic materials that I can use, and ultimately ending up with some type of comparison between the target culture and the students in their home community. Something I highly recommend is repurposing existing educational materials. And I just put in this plug. In we're finishing up the decade of Education for Sustainable Development that was sponsored by the United Nations. It was 2005 to 2014. And the Germans ended up spending a decade creating just one educational material after another, because that's what Germans do. But I encourage you to, in the targets, in the languages that you teach, to see what kinds of educational materials have been created already around issues of sustainability. And what kinds of materials were created for the junior high and high school students in that country. Going on teacher portals in the target culture. Going to the government websites, going to the website of the energy company. And this, and this is this crazy thing, is that I discover all this stuff when I'm looking at it in Germany, and then I went on the energy website for my own local energy company in Minnesota, and lo and behold, they have a whole bunch of educational materials on there as well. So there's a lot that's been didacticized already, and a lot of great ideas there that that can be implemented with additional scaffolding, where you have to bring in first this looking at the vocabulary, and then a concrete situation where they can apply it. For German, this is the type of, the EU has a lot of materials as well, and then they're in all the different languages of the European Union. I also use a lot of children's television programming, educational programming, or children news reports for children. In German, again, there's this great one, Logo Nachrichten, where it gets at that, where the topic is brought down into simplified language with a lot of visuals. And so it's a great way of introducing students to a new concept and the vocabulary. Oh, challenges! Woo! Here we come. We talked about these at the beginning, the balance between language and content. I would say also a real problem is falling back on familiar models. It's really ingrained in us to try to figure out how to practice the grammar point. And so I think and that everything becomes subservient to practicing the grammar point. And so I guess one thing I would say is when I'm trying to implement a lot of these more culture or content, I don't do as much correction and feedback on the language. Because I know I'm doing that so much at other times. And so I try to really get the students to know, I want to know what you think. And then teachers' comfort level with regards to teaching the content. And we heard this from some of you earlier. I'm not an expert in this. I'm not an expert in that. And the way I try to approach that is by thinking about the national standards. So rather than, I'm not going to be the person who's teaching the scientific level of sustainability, but I can talk about sustainability as it is functioning or is a topic in that culture and try to bring in through these comparisons or some basic connections to outside disciplines. I better be quiet so that I can give you all a chance to ask a few questions. So, questions? Yes.
I have a question. What do you think is the importance of assessing the acquisition of content in lessons like this, particularly in classes mostly concerned with teaching language?
To some degree, I think that if we don't assess it, they don't think it's important. And the assessment, the assessment piece, particularly when it comes into an integrated performance assessment, is their familiarity with the topic and the familiarity with the vocabulary. And again, if it's something that's important in the target culture, then I think that there's a value to being able to talk about it. Thank you.
I have a question, Carl in Southwestern. How do you identify curricular objectives? What do you focus on? Yeah, what is your curricular objective that you want to work for?
Yeah, this summer, my colleagues and I, we went through a process of trying to come up with curricular goals. And we tried to use backward design and coming up with enduring understandings and essential questions. And thinking about always, what's the big picture and what is transferable. So I'm looking at what are concepts and lifelong lessons that are transferable. So if we're talking about urban space, the value of nature in our daily lives, I think that's something that is important to carry on in life. And so I think there's a value to that. But anyway, I would say thinking about looking at the idea of backward design. The book is by Wiggins, and thinking about a large goal and then down to the nitty-gritty of how am I going to get my students there.
Thanks. That helps.
It's just one more thing, the challenge is that I think it's a lot easier if you're doing it in your own class. It's harder to convince other people to do what you're doing yourself. And that might not be an issue at the schools your size, but at the university where we're trying to have consistency across the whole curriculum, it's a challenge to get everyone to buy in. So anyway, that for me personally is one of the greatest challenges.
Thank you very much. We really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Great.
Furman University.
Thank you.
Well,
if you have other
thank
questions,
you. Yep. Thank you from Southwestern. I have colleagues who are interested but weren't able to attend. And
okay.
I will be sending them the material and we'll be talking about this. This is very close to a lot of the things that we're trying to do.
Great.
We have a question for you from Furman. I'm new to I'm normally not the person who's moderating. Are the PDFs available through the website, the Kai website from I'm sorry, not the PDF, the PowerPoint that you did today?
we can do that. Yeah.
That would be great. There was information we wanted to look at more.
Okay.
Yeah, any of the information that you're seeing on the screen today will be available to you through the Sakai site if you've gone ahead and registered. And if you haven't registered officially and you just have to be an extra person who's in the audience this afternoon, go ahead and email me directly. This is Dick Hittner from Washington and Lee. And we'll ensure that you are put on the site so you have access to all the information, including the PowerPoint, including the video, because this will be up also within a couple of days, by next Monday or Tuesday. We'll make sure that this is available for everybody. So you can share it with your colleagues at schools that you're at. All right?
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.